week 3 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few kickers I look to start this week. The first one, Younghoe Koo of the Atlanta Falcons. So far, it's been a decent start for Younghoe Koo. Last week, a nice ball game at the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday Night Football, double-digit fantasy points. And now this week back home, week 3, on Sunday Night Football versus the Kansas City Chiefs coming to town. So Younghoe Koo, he's been a better kicker throughout his career at home. It's an indoor stadium, obviously, and they know they got to put points on the board. So there might be a few situations in this one where Koo goes out there and they trot him out for a 50, 55-yarder where they know they got to come up most drives with points on the board. So Younghoe Koo, one of the more accurate kickers of all time, great kicker at home. And this week in a matchup where they need points, I believe he's a solid start. The next start, Jake Moody of the San Francisco 49ers. So San Francisco last week, a disappointing game after a dominant performance versus the New York Jets in week 1, after losing at the Minnesota Vikings. So Jake Moody, after a 20-plus point performance week 1, only 5 fantasy points last week, but this week a good matchup at the Rams. Their defense so far, the first 2 weeks, haven't stopped anyone, giving up 26 points to the Lions in week 1 and then 41 points to the Arizona Cardinals in week 2. So this week, I think San Francisco could get on the board early and often. I know Deebo Samuel's out. We know Christian McCaffrey's been out, but Jordan Mason's been a great fill-in. And I think Jake Moody's going to get opportunities and bounce back this week's kicker, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Steelers, they're not going to score a lot of touchdowns, it looks like, this season. Good defense and running the football and getting in good field goal range has been the name of the game the first 2 weeks of the year. Week 1, Boswell went off with 6 field goals, over 20 fantasy points at the Falcons. And then week 2 with Denver, he had 9 fantasy points. So Boswell, one of the more accurate kickers from 50-plus of all time in pro football history. And this week, a decent matchup versus the Chargers. Their defense has been a bend-but-don't-break unit so far in the early going. And Chris Boswell, they have big confidence in him. As long as they could get in decent field position to line him up for a 50, 55-yarder, he's going to hit it most of the time. So once again, Boswell's been one of the best kickers to start the season. He's a start. The next start, Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. Last week, a big game it was for Evan McPherson. And we know he's got the big boot. He could kick it from anywhere on the field. And week 1, 6 fantasy points. And then last week, 14 fantasy points. Even though he did miss an extra point, is McPherson. He hit one from 20 to 29 range, 30-39 range, a 40-49 range, and a 53-yarder. So this week in a matchup where they should be in the red zone early and often versus a weak Commander defense, I think once again Evan McPherson could go out there and have a double-digit performance on Monday night. And the final kicker I look to start is Jake Elliott of the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles, they know they're going to have to put points on the board in this one with the New Orleans Saints high-octane offense to start the season. 91 points in the first 2 weeks. So Jake Elliott, we know he's been a solid kicker the last few seasons. And the start of the year, he's been good. Week 1 versus Green Bay, 10 fantasy points. And week 2 versus the Falcons, he had 7 fantasy points. So this week in the Dome in New Orleans, like I said, they got to put points on the board. New Orleans, they're putting the football in the end zone almost every drive, 91 points to start the year. And Jake Elliott's going to get opportunities, and he's been one of the more consistent kickers in the league over the last couple of years. That's a few kickers I look to start for week 3 of the fantasy football season.